Hey everyone, Sean Frangella here for MotionTutorials.net with a new After Effects tutorial about how to create this CG snow and ice blue look that you've probably seen a lot in Game of Thrones whenever they're showing scenes with the Night's Watch or in the wintry areas. So here we got this final shot and we got a couple things going on here. In this clip, my wife is playing the role of super serious close up, and here's our original footage, and on top of that we have our CG snow flying around past the camera, and then we got this bluish tint color grade to give it that cool wintry look. So in this one we're going to talk about how to create the CG snow, and in the other part of this tutorial we'll talk about how to create this cool blue look. So if you want to jump ahead and get to that tint one first, you can do that by clicking on that thumbnail, or you can watch that one after this video. So how we're going to create this snow is by using the plugin Trapcode Particular. And if you're not familiar with Trapcode Particular, it's an After Effects plugin by Red Giant. So you can get it at their site at redgiant.com. Or if you just want to follow along with the tutorial, you can actually get a free trial and work through the tutorial. So grab that if you want to just follow along, even with the free trial. So we're in After Effects. I'm just going to delete all of this extra stuff. So I just have my footage in my composition, and the camera's moving past. And what I'm gonna do first is create a new solid with layer new solid, or Command Y, and I'll just call this particular. Doesn't matter what color it is, but I like to make it a bright color so it stands out in the stack. And then I'm gonna get particular under my effects and just drag that on. And that's gonna drop on the default particular setting. So if I scrub ahead, there's just this little burst coming out from the center. That's not at all what we want. That's not doing us any good. But if we're in the current version of Particular, which is 2.5, we could go about building this snow a couple different ways. There is this new effects builder, so if you're in the new version, you could give this a whirl. It's pretty interesting. What you can do is similar to their looks suite is change the type of emitter. So if you wanted like this box, and go through the steps, so you could change the particle to a different particle. You could change the style, a bit of the physics, and the idea is that you could then apply that, skip some of the manual setup. It's gonna feed that into all of our settings, and then you could manually adjust it to see fit. So if you want to try that route, that's a good starting point, but I like to do it from scratch and completely understand what's going on. So I'm just gonna click reset. And if we look at this footage, what we want is snow that's kind of floating in 3D space past the camera, and slowly, as it would be if it was really here. And the first step is it does help that there's actual snow in this shot. So there's some snow on the ground. You can see there's a cold breath coming out. So anything in a practical sense that you can always add into a shot or have in a shot is always going to help push the effect. If this was a 100-degree day on a beach, it's not going to do it any justice. But having real practical effects and cold weather is going to help, and you don't got to add in fake CG breath coming out. And so what we want to do is build out three-dimensional snow falling and floating by to match our shot. So I'm just going to solo our particular layer real quick, and the default just shoots out from the center. That's not doing us any good. So what we want to do is build this as a three-dimensional system so it'll fill the frame. So the way we can do that is change our emitter type from point to box. That's going to light up this emitter size X, Y, and Z. And what we can do is just scale this bigger than the entire frame in X and Y. So it'll always be emitting from this kind of big container box. And then we can even turn up Z quite a bit. So in the final shot, we'll have snow that's floating close to the camera and far off in the distance. So if we look at our final shot, we can see that's what we got going on. Some of it's kind of out of focus, close to the camera, and it's filling our shot in a three-dimensional way, not just as a layer on top of our footage. So all that's going to do is have it kind of dancing around, and it's going to start out black. So this very important setting that I pretty much always add on, we can go to emission extras, turn up pre-run, and that's basically going to start populating our shot with particles before the start of the layer, so it'll already be out there. Now again, these just kind of float there and it's not doing us any justice. So let's go through how to build this. We got our emitter tab, that's how many particles we have and their shape that they're in. So let's just say it's a bit more, like 250. Looks like a bit much, but that's fine for now. And then in this second tab, we have our particle, so what it looks like. And this is where a lot of the magic is going to happen to make this feel like snow. So we don't want them suddenly popping on and off, as you can see they kind of do here. So I'm just going to turn their lifespan up to 20 seconds. And if we got too many particles, we can always go back and change that. And I don't necessarily want this little round dot because we want to at least feel like it's a little bit of a unique snowflake. So I'm going to change it from particle type from sphere to cloudlet. And any of these default ones are going to render a lot quicker than a custom one. So that'll at least give us some uniqueness without blowing up the render time. And that looks a little extreme. It just looks like these blobs. What we can do is feather that cloud, take the size down a bit, so maybe 2 or 3. And again, we can always change these a bit later. We're just trying to get close and then we can adjust it. I'm going to randomize the size completely so we get different sizes. I'm going to take my opacity way down because we don't need it that thick. And you can already see it's kind of starting to feel like snow even on the still frame. And I'm going to turn up opacity random, and that really is helping it to feel like it's not just the CG particle simulation. And then the last thing I want to change here is this opacity over life. Now, again, this is particular 2.5, so if you're on an earlier version, these might be red. It might look a little different, but we want to make sure it's on this preset with this little bell curve, and that's just going to make sure that they aren't suddenly popping up and disappearing in case we see any. So that's starting to feel good. It looks like snow, but they're all just kind of floating up and down and all over the place, and we want them to look like they're following our shot and be going in a direction as if there's going to wind and gravity floating them down. So we can adjust that in a couple tabs down, and we jump into this physics tab. This is what's going to let us control their movement in addition to this random velocity, which is being created by these settings up here. And if we pop open this air tab, really create some unique movement to them so it doesn't look like they're just all moving in the same direction. Now, what's cool in the most recent versions of After Effects is I can press 0 and let this RAM preview, and then I can just let this play as I'm adjusting these settings, and it's going to keep updating. So you can see right now they're just kind of floating. What I want to do is give it a little more gravity, but not too much. So we can see they're kind of floating down, and that's, again, going one step further. Every one of these little steps is going to help us get closer to what we're trying to do. And now they're floating down. That's doing us some good there. But we want it to be kind of blowing a little bit with the movement of the camera. And if we add this on top of our shot and quickly do a RAM preview, we can see our camera's rotating around, and we could track the camera and get it in there. But in this particular shot, when it's a close-up and there's just this basic smooth, slow pan, it's not totally necessary, in my opinion, and we're just going to create extra work. And we're not seeing it hit the ground and lock on anyway. It's just kind of floating in front of and behind her. So what we could do is add some wind, and if we add some negative wind on X, and going to keep turning that up. Now we can see they're going to kind of float to the left, and that's going to help it feel like they're a little more alive and unique and moving along with our camera. We can keep pushing that up. And if we want there to be a little bit of extra wind on Y in addition to the gravity, we could add some of that, and they're going to move down a little. And what's cool about this stuff is if you really want to push it and add little gusts, you could animate all this stuff with these stopwatches and have them move around. I'll just extend our work area so we get an extra second so we can see what's happening. Now, to really give this some unique personality, just our spin right here and our turbulence field. So if we turn up spin amplitude way too high, you can see they're really popping all over the place and floating around. And that's probably too much, but we can just have a little bit of that, and that'll make it a little more interesting so they're not just floating in one direction evenly. And then under turbulence field, if we turn up effect position, it's going to have them move and wave around based on this little invisible organic system. So if we check on visualize fields and let it play, we can see that there's this thing twisting around. And if we turn up effect position a lot, this thing is really going to be twisting and turning in X, Y, and Z space. You can see how they're all flying all over the place. So if there was a crazy windstorm, we could use that. But we could turn it down to something more subtle where we get a little bit of this movement that you can see that's moving and twisting them around, but not going totally nuts. And then for rendering, we can turn off visualize fields. And that's already starting to look pretty good and pretty close to what we want. We could keep tweaking our wind as well as adjusting our spin up and down a bit. And when we get pretty close, now we could turn back on our footage let it render, and really see how this is integrating into our shot. Now, a couple things we could do to push this even further. We could blend this entire particular layer on top of our footage. So if we change the blending mode on particular to something like overlay, you can see it's going to blend together. That's going to help a lot. And to make it really three-dimensional, we could really turn up our emitter size on Z. So you can see there's some that are getting really close to the camera. And there's a camera in this shot that's moving, obviously, but just for After Effects purposes, to make depth of field active, we could create a new camera. And I'm just going to leave it on 50 millimeter. That'll work for this. I could enable depth of field here, but I'll do that in a second. I'm going to press OK. And Particular is three-dimensional, so it can be affected by camera properties. So if I grab my camera and press AA to open up my camera properties, I could turn on depth of field. And then if I turn my aperture up quite a bit, you can see based on where our focus distance lays, other particles will be coming more and less in and out of focus. You can kind of see this one is a good example, and we're getting some nice blurry out of focus snow particles. And again, we're matching this to the shot. So if we turn off the particular layer, you can see this background stuff is pretty out of focus. We're getting this nice bokeh look on these little lights. And if we do the same sort of thing with our particles, we have our aperture up pretty high so we get out of focus. And then for the final render, we could change this iris shape to something like a hexagon. It's going to feel like it's part of that shot. And since these are moving in a three-dimensional space, we could turn on motion blur for that particular layer right here and for our composition. And it's just an extra little detail that's going to make it feel like they're actually moving. Now, we could really keep tweaking this and really make it feel realistic with a lot of these settings. If we go to Particular, we could turn down our particles if we just want a little bit of misting snow. We could turn it way up if we really want it to be a crazy snowstorm, and then it's going to start to look a little fake, but you can get the idea. And you can keep letting the RAM preview run, and maybe we add in more wind and more turbulence to have it move around, and really overlay this on top of the footage and try to integrate it into our shot. Now, that wasn't even that many steps, but already pretty quickly we got this CG snow that's looking like that floating snow does in that stylized look in Game of Thrones. The next step is to add on this bluish color grade to really give it a specific look. And you can learn how to do that in the next part of this tutorial, where we'll go over how to use the new Lumetri color to create this cool blue look and adjust a lot of these settings. And if you wanted to go even further and really have snow physically in front of a character and behind a character, so we're seeing some of it actually pass behind our character / my wife here, you could also use the roto brush to roto out your character and have that particular layer sitting behind it. So I have another tutorial if you want to learn about that. And if you want to learn about any other motion graphics, 3D camera tracking, visual effects tutorials, be sure to check out some of those other ones if you want to learn about the camera tracking or any other steps that you might be looking for to up your game in visual effects and compositing in After Effects and Cinema 4D. I got tons of tutorials on this stuff. I hope you guys like this one and check out some of those other ones where you can keep adding little tricks and effects to your arsenal of VFX. And if you're really curious on exactly how this got made and the settings that I have, if you want to get a hold of these project files, including the footage and all the After Effects assets, you can do that one of two ways, either by heading over to motiontutorials.net and clicking on support the show, where you could throw in a couple bucks and get project files for this one and many of my other tutorials, or you can jump onto patreon.com/SeanFrangella, where you can throw in a couple extra bucks to get a set of project files for 3 tutorials. Or if you want all of my project files for all my tutorials, that's about 100 at this point, you could donate $10 per tutorial and get access to all of my project files for After Effects, Cinema 4D, and all the motion graphics tutorials. Or if you don't want to do that, that's fine. If you just have a couple questions, you can hit me up on Twitter. I'm at SeanFrangella, as well as check out the Facebook page at facebook.com/motiontutorials. And as always, be sure to subscribe on youtube.com/SeanFrangella to get weekly tutorials set straight to your YouTube subscription and your inbox. And again, if you want to keep learning, click some of those thumbnails and check out more of my tutorials. As always, thanks for watching, and I will see you at the next video.